Hello there, and welcome to the Second Life Book Club. My name is Draxtor, and today on the show we have a first. It's a first for us. We are having a guest who has not even published one single novel, but, and that is why we have her on, she is a creator of incredibly dense and imaginative worlds through her short speculative fiction. She is a winner of multiple awards, a nominee of multiple awards. It is just amazing, an amazing pleasure for me, and I hope the audience agrees with me. In case you don't know her, you will by the end of the hour. We welcome G.V. Anderson or Gemma Anderson. Hello.
Hello, thank you for having me.
It's such a pleasure. Will I be calling you Gemma or GV?
Gemma's fine.
Okay. So Gemma, how are you? Is this strange to have a virtual embodiment? Are you familiar with these worlds or these games? Do you hang out in games?
Not really, no, but I have to say I'm really enjoying this because over the last 18 months using Zoom, I've seen far too much of my own face. So it's quite nice to have an avatar and just watch that instead.
This is really something that we hear every time, even from very, very skeptical authors. They come in and they look at the Second Life homepage when I first, asked them to come on. They go like, "Yeah, I don't know. I don't like, I'm not 18 years old anymore when I hang out and look like I have a bunch of tattoos and run around and whatnot."
Mhm.
And they feel really liberated when they come in here in their avatar embodiment and also with this wonderful audience that we have here.
Yes, it's really lovely to be here, and I absolutely love what you've done behind me with the hologram and the statue as well.
Let's give the camera a little time to cam around and set the stage a little bit with this set. This castle was built by Solus, but everything inside was put together by Ruby, and we actually have Jared is carving a Steingeschef. We'll talk about that later. What a Steingeschef is. You were referring to the hologram. This is the cover of the Lay of Lilyfinger, which is one of your short stories that I read. And on the other side, we have um, a cover for the Steingeschef. This cover does not exist. It was created by our set designer. The Steingeschef short story has no cover, so we had to create one. Um, on the on the table here in front of us, and we'll talk about that too, is a whole bunch of your stories,
Mhm.
but also the magazines. And this is what I want to talk about because magazines, the whole magazine and anthology world and culture is fascinating to me. So I'm gonna pick your brain how this all works with submitting to these magazines and how they actually stay in business. So we have
Mhm.
a whole bunch of magazines here on the table. If people cam around on the table, they will see one book that is not written by you. It's called The Procedure by Harry Mulisch, which is about a golem type figure. So anyway, we'll talk about that too. If the camera wants to zoom out a little bit, then the folks on YouTube can see that we are in this wonderful castle, which is on the top at the 3,000-meter level or the 1,500 meter level of the Book Club Island, and surrounded by mountains with a river running through, um, a dragon in the river, and another bunch of Steingeschöpfes um, outside. I'll give the camera a little time to zoom out here and look at the castle. And back to you, Gemma. How does it feel? How does COVID feel to you in terms of the creative energy or lack thereof? I mean, we get a lot of different responses to this question. Some people say, you know what, it's actually good. It forces me to be creative. I have more time, and other people say that the time that they have is useless because of the anxiety of where the world is going. How is that for you?
So I fall into the second camp.
Yeah.
And because of what I do for my day job, um, the pandemic made that a lot more stressful. Um, so it meant that not only was I working longer hours, the time that I did have, as you said, was taken up with me just trying to recharge, because writing it does feel like work.
Right.
So, after I've done like a really, really difficult day, the last thing I want to do is basically go to a second job. So, I found the last sort of 18 months really difficult in terms of writing. I haven't made as much progress as I wanted to for 2020 or 2021, it's been really frustrating. But I know that as many people as it's been a good thing, it's been a bad thing for others. And
Is that
everyone's in the same boat. So,
so what you're saying is that because writing is also a job, and it can drain you. You got to produce stuff on paper,
mhm.
and you have to be productive. You're saying, if I understood you correctly, that maybe contrary to the perception of people outside, they go like, hey, you're so lucky, after your 9 to 5 you can sit down and write really cool stories, and you say, wait a minute, it's not that easy. Actually, there is an additional pressure to actually produce tangible results.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good mindset to have, to think that your writing time is a treat. Like, you get through your day job and you get through your chores, and the writing is the treat that you reward yourself with afterwards. That's a really good way of thinking about it. But it is work, and it is hard, especially if you're at a certain working on something like drafting. That means you're coming up with something new, versus editing. That's working a whole different side of your brain.
Mhm.
So either one of those can have challenges when you're already feeling run down and tired. And yeah, so it's definitely not the nice thing. Sometimes it's lovely, sometimes not.
People in the chat can chime in here. Kiara said, to be honest, COVID ruined everything. Um, I think we agree on some variation of this, but please do keep those comments coming. Also on YouTube, I'm monitoring YouTube and also Twitter if you have questions. Now, to start things off, Gemma, and I hope um, you're not getting mad at me because well, people really like the guests to read. I get a lot of emails and messages that say, Drax, you talk too much. Let the guests speak. Let the guests read. I was contacted by a Geschöpf. Geschöpf is the German word for creature.
Mhm.
And I was contacted by this Geschöpf, and you wrote a story called Das Steingeschef. And this Geschöpf was hiding out at the Second Life Welcome area, and he just wants to read from the Steingeschef. So if that's okay, if he could start us off before you actually read, is that okay?
Absolutely, go for it.
Okay, here Geschöpf, please come out. A warm welcome to Das Steingeschöpf. Das Steingeschöpf just came out here in front of us, and oh, I gotta check if the camera. I think we have a camera issue. Hold on. Hold on, my friends. Hold on. Let me make sure that we are live. Uh-oh, I think we have trouble with the stream. So the Geschöpf has to remain there for a second before we get the camera back, because our camera person just crashed.
Oh no.
Yeah, yeah. I see. Oh, stay tuned. We will be right back. She will be right back. Um, well. I think it's too much Stein is going on. There's definitely too much Stein. Interestingly enough, a little aside, the neighbors where I grew up, my parents' neighbors, this was the Stein family.
Mhm.
And there is a huge sci-fi series that started in Germany after World War II, started in the 60s, called Perry Roden. I don't know if
Mhm.
people know that. It's also quite well known in America. And Frau Stein, she was collecting the Perry Rodens from the 60s. And when I got into sci-fi at the age of 12, 13 or whatever, she gave me an entire box of Perry Roden, the original books, it's Pulp Fiction, books and magazines, entire box full. And I think I sold it to someone or I gave it to someone. This stuff would be
Oh,
is worth so much money. I don't even want to think about it. It's but also just the artistic value of this. Anyways, so when I think of Stein, I think of this giving away.
so that was one of your like earliest things you read for science fiction, was it?
Perry Roden was huge. What was yours? I mean, how did you get into this?
Um,
What was the bug that
well,
infected you?
I always, read books growing up. I'm of that age and generation where my main one was Harry Potter.
Oh, that's
Um,
Harry Potter, huh?
yeah, and other things such as His Dark
Can you
Materials.
separate the art from the artist? Sorry, I'm relentless with this stuff. Well, that's a whole other
um,
discussion.
yes and no. I think Harry Potter isn't something that I would be able to reread now, but I can appreciate it for what it did for me at the time and how much
Right,
I enjoyed it as a child. I think I have very fond memories of it, but it's just, I think if I was to pick it up now, there would be things that I would snag on too much to enjoy.
right. That's the same.
Um,
That's with me and with Lovecraft and Conan the Barbarian. It's a
mm,
similar relationship. Also
mm.
because it's also I mean it's different because Conan is also really not that well written. The prose is
Oh,
just pretty bad.
watch the film instead.
Well, I mean, Arnold said he was asked, Mr. Schwarzenegger, how did you like to play Conan? And he said, I did not play Conan. I am Conan. Anyways, we're back live on the air. We must not, um, steal this spotlight from das Steingeschöpf before we get deeper into the issues. And I know that there are questions already coming. Caballos is asking a question about technique and plot. Please keep that for a little bit later. So the Steingeschöpf is now emerging from behind the cover of Das Steingeschöpf. And here is das Steingeschöpf. And the Steingeschöpf is going to read from das Steingeschöpf. Do you want to set it up real quick? What is that story about? It's
Yep.
1928. Fascism is on the rise in Germany, and there is apparently craftsmen that make what do they make?
Yep. So Der Steingeschöpf is a story about a young sculptor or schöpfer who is asked to come and restore an old Steingeschöpf. Steingeschöpf are sculpted out of a stone that can siphon away your energy and animate itself.
And not
Um,
only the energy, also parts of your personality, kind of, right?
yes, yes, personality, memories. It can kind of become an amalgamation of every creator, sculptor who's worked on the statue. So it's about a young sculptor who's doing his first restoration ever.
And this is an incredibly dense story. I mean, there's so much stuff in there. The fact that these Geschöpfes, they absorb the personality, they become animated, they do things, they become friends, they do stuff around the house, they can do anything in this little excerpt. We also hear that the Statue of Liberty is also somewhat related to them.
Mhm.
This is the winner of the World Fantasy Award uh, for you in 2016. Was this your first published story?
This was my first professional published story. Before
Wow.
this, I had published very short stories, flash stories, to small magazines, but this was my first professional sale.
All right. So the camera is on. Calabus says it's similar to a golem. Then yes, we'll talk about the relationship to the golem. Here's
Yes.
the Steingeschöpf. The camera, please keep on the Steingeschöpf. And the Steingeschöpf is going to read right now in first person from the perspective of the Schöpfer, the creator, and how he got into this business between World War One and World War Two. Here we go. Take it away, Geschöpf.
Berlin was hell during the First War. Food shortages had forced me to eat the bark off trees to survive, to get by with loaves made from 1/4 flour and 3/4 ash, hardly enough for anyone of 14. Interest in becoming a Schöpfer, but after the closure of the home where I had grown up, I applied for a guild apprenticeship simply because the advertisement trodden into the gutter outside a soup kitchen promised hot, regular meals and a dormitory with running water. I was apprenticed with 9 other boys to Herr Schöpfer Fellinger, a man with a severe center parting who had developed, since the signing of the armistice, a deep suspicion for anyone who looked remotely Jewish. "You've got that pallid, sickly look about you," he sneered up at me during our first lesson. "Aren't Jews supposed to be short and fat?" A scrawny red-haired boy with a crooked front tooth shouted from the back, which made the rest of the boys laugh. Gradually, Fellinger introduced us to Queckstein, the material from which all Steingeschöpfe are carved. We spent months observing and then experiencing in small doses its siphoning effect, how it sucks away a Schöpfer's energy and animates itself. We toured exhibitions and heard lectures from renowned Italian masters. We were shown newsreels of the Statue of Liberty, the largest Steingeschöpf ever created. She still guards the port of New York, waiting in the deep waters of the city's harbor and hailing new arrivals with the hearty bienvenue of many long dead Frenchmen. Head and board and the craft, I admit, invigorated me. I worked hard to recognize the difference between a rondel chisel and a tooth chisel. I learned how to touch completed Steingeschöpfe, how to listen to the echoes inside them. Even Fellinger had to admit my progress was more than passable. Permitted to work with raw Queckstein, however, it became clear that our styles clashed. He loved floridity, while I was drawn to everything sparse and efficient. "You favor a steady line," he once said as he inspected my latest carving, and from anyone else it might have been a compliment. I knew better. I knew that to Fellinger, steady meant predictable, and predictable meant boring. Of the 10 boys apprenticed, only I and one other, Franz, the red haired boy, earned our badges. I admired Franz's designs, as elegant as he was coarse. He had stretched caramel limbs, unnaturally elongated and graceful, wisps of stone hardly existing at all. Came when they spoke. Franz knew every foul word I'd ever heard and then some, and every Steingeschäft he made, however beautiful, knew them too. When Fellinger presented our work to the guildmasters one summer, "Fick dich, du blödes Arschloch!" We
Oh,
crouched outside the door with our fists in our mouths and tears trailing down our cheeks.
and yeah, that is das Steingeschöpf reading from Das Steingeschöpf by our guest, G.V. Anderson. Gemma, this is pretty cool. And we even snuck in some German swearing here because I don't think YouTube can detect this. And our overlords at Linden Lab Makers of Second Life will probably don't know what he's talking about. But basically, yeah, Kabbalas was saying earlier that this is kind of a golem story. Tell us a little bit, like, how did you come up with this? And I think I have a slide. Um, wasn't there a slide prepared, Charlotte? Can you send the slide over with the golem? Because I think we have a slide prepared. A golem. I had to look this up before. A golem is an animated anthropomorphic being in Jewish folklore, which is entirely created from inanimate matter, usually
Mhm,
clay or mud.
mhm.
Anyways, is this golem related somehow?
I mean, it kind of came about from a couple of different sources. I didn't specifically set out to write anything that had a Jewish feel to it. Actually, it wasn't until the edits where someone pointed out that the surname of the protagonist, Herr Herzl, sounds like a Jewish surname, and that kind of
Yeah.
set things firing with regards to where they were and what time it was in. And it,
So that wasn't even the backdrop in the beginning, that it was under the in the interbellum period with the Nazis on the rise and
it was
anti-Semitism.
Yeah, it was always going to be set there and then, but it wasn't until a bit later into the process where someone gave me the seed for sort of growing onto that. And then in hindsight, I realized that actually I'd kind of written a Golem story. um, but yeah, it came from a few different things. Portrait of Dorian Gray was one of them, like the portrait that takes on um, uh, the look and the experiences that you have while leaving you untouched.
Hmm.
That was kind of on my mind. There was also there is a golem in Discworld, I believe, going postal.
Yes,
Um,
Ava is actually saying this right now here in the local chat that
Yes, yeah. I can't remember his name. I'm gonna have to go on my phone and Google it because
Ava, we have the audience for Googling. Ava, please Google. Oh, she says detritus,
that's
detritus.
yes, that's it. And there was a TV adaptation of Going Postal here in the UK, which I absolutely loved, and their depiction of the Golem character, I just really like him. So there was a few different things going through my head when I was making the character, and it wasn't actually until later that someone pointed out the connection there, and then it was like, well, I've got to run with it.
I brought up this slide that our co-producer Shala put together. Here's a bunch of Golem pictures that she found on the internet. Really, really cool. And I encourage everyone to go. Well, first get das Steingeschef because it's just a remarkable story. It's very short. There's so much in there, Gemma. It's amazing. And here on
Thank
the
you.
table, I have a book by Harry Mulisch called The Procedure. But before we go on and on, we want to hear you read from Das Geschöpf, and now magically a book stand will appear out of the ground, because that's how this works here in Second Life, with das Steingeschöpf already displayed here on the book stand. If I could ask you to stand up and attempt to walk forward without falling off the stage.
You can
You
certainly ask. I'll
you will
try.
never be invited again. I mean, this is this is your little test here. There we go. Cool.
Okay,
Awesome.
I'm gonna
You
stay here.
passed.
Thank you.
And you're
So
going to read straight from the beginning. Actually, I was going to say that in the Steingeschef's reading, maybe it was not really audible. He basically is in Berlin and he goes down to down south to Bavaria, where I'm from. So he was actually talking about the situation in Berlin. I think he's an orphan child, or
yep.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, the bit that we heard earlier was kind of the flashback covering his time learning his trade as an apprentice. I'm going to just read from the beginning of the story, and it kind of sets up where he's going, why, and what he finds when he gets there. So I will jump in. I'd not long been made journeyman when the Schupfers Guild gave me my first commission in 1928. Frau Leitner from Bavaria had written to request a small restoration. I took the southbound train from Berlin, made 2 changes, and disembarked at the end of the line in a small town tucked between the pleats of the mountains. A ragged man with a horse-drawn cart was waiting for me. We travelled by lamplight up a steep, icy path to the front door of an old timber chalet. All was dark and quiet. I jumped down, the snow crackling beneath my weight, and turned to thank the driver. He'd already clicked to the horse and was turning the cart around, grimly avoiding my eye. He spat a wad of sooty phlegm towards me, which landed on one of my new guild-issued boots with a soft splot. I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was every time. Even a Schupfer's status couldn't protect me from this. I had curly hair and dark, prominent eyes, an easy target. I wanted to shout at his retreating back that I had worn my fair share of rags too, that my pristine clothing wasn't due to some Jewish conspiracy. But I swallowed my words, of course, as I always had. I pulled out a handkerchief and knelt to wipe my boot. The creak of the cart's wheels had faded by the time I trudged up to the door of the chalet. I knocked. A woman with kingfisher eyes opened the door. Wer sind Sie? Frau Leitner, I said. I'm from the guild. She backed away to let me in. I ducked beneath the lintel. The low ceiling beams forced me to stoop. Thank you for coming, Herr Schopfer, she said. Her voice was gravel, full of cracks and pops. Please, Herr Herzl is fine, I replied, waving away the formal title. I'm sorry to call on you so late. The journey took longer than I expected. As I spoke, she led me into a small kitchen where a fire was dying in the grate. The logs looked suspiciously like chair legs. I shed my scarf and gloves, keeping my coat on for warmth, set my leather tool case on the table, and took a seat, while Frau Leitner unhooked the kettle hanging over the fire. When she bent closer to the light, I could make out her features. The little details of this memory, the fabric of her coat, wool or cotton, the grain of the worktops, rough or smooth, they have with time disintegrated like flesh. They elude me now. But I do remember her face. It is a shopper's habit, I suppose, to remember interesting faces. She was quite chinless, her bottom lip blending into her neck almost seamlessly, and her cheeks had a deflated, gaunt look that told of too much weight lost too quickly. Her hair was more grey than blonde. She was old enough for grown children. I knew better than to ask their whereabouts. She poured tea into chipped mugs, and as she sat down, burst into an eye-watering coughing fit. She covered her mouth with a shaking hand, her cheeks flashing. I rose from my chair, unsure what to do, but she waved me down. That doesn't sound too healthy, I said. It comes and goes, she croaked. I cleared my throat. I know it's late, but we should discuss the restoration if you don't mind. I'd like to get an idea of how much work is needed. What can you tell me about the piece? His name is Amboise. He's French? She hesitated, her breath crackling. Yeah, originally. And how did he come to be in your possession? He's been with us a long time. My great-grandmother took him in, helped him find patrons for his paintings. She took a tentative sip of tea. He doesn't much like dealing with strangers, so I help him with it now. I wasn't surprised by this arrangement. Many of Amboise's kind find positions with families as companions and teachers. And it's a small repair. She coughed once and looked away. His eyes have deteriorated so much, he can hardly see to paint. After our tea, Frau Leitner showed me upstairs to the attic. The slanted beams were high enough to allow me to stand comfortably, but there were boards covering the windows, and I couldn't see anything at all. I began to take a step, but Frau Leitner threw an arm across my middle to stop me. Wait here, she said. With her coat pulled up over her mouth to keep out the dust, she disappeared into the darkness. I heard the splintering of old wood, and suddenly starlight was streaming in from a large window, illuminating Frau Leitner as she propped the board against the wall. Perched on a stool in the middle of the room was the largest Steingeschef I'd ever seen.
Wonderful. Big round of applause. Wonderful reading. This is Gemma Anderson reading from the beginning of Das Steingeschef. People were just asking, where can you read it? This is on the Strange Horizons website. But if you guys in World click on the table here on any book prop, it will send you to Gemma's website, and you can find all the relevant links there. Now, what is fascinating, Gemma, because I read the flashback, and you read the beginning here, and this is when I was prepping the show. It occurred to me from your technique or how you construct these stories. Do you sometimes shuffle around middle, beginning, and end, or that you start constructing it beginning, middle, and end, and you go like, you know what, I could just put the middle at the beginning, because you could have done this too with this story, I guess.
Yeah, I wish I could write out of order because that would make it really nice and convenient to then slot things where I want them to go. But no, I have to write in the order that it reads,
Hmm.
because you find the right beats for the flashbacks, and you find the opportunities in the present narration, reasons to go back and fill in the story. And I don't find the transitions, um, they're harder if it's already been written out of order or if it's being moved from place to place. So no, I write in the order that it's read.
Yeah, but you read it in the end. You read it, but I mean, is this is how the story is happening. I mean, he
Mhm.
arrives, he gets the job, he arrives there, and then he goes to the flashback. So I see what you're saying. I mean,
Mm.
the flashbacks, they flash back. He starts in the present, and then he goes back into the past.
Mhm.
Um, but do you construct it this way? Do you sketch it out this way, that, or do you just write and go like, okay, intuitively I know I need to bring the flashback in here right now?
I mean, it is planned to a degree. Every story is a bit different. Some stories you can kind of go by feel and instinct, and you don't need to plan so much. With the Steingeschef, it made sense that there were going to be 3 flashbacks to a certain person in the story, because 3 felt like a balanced, almost fairy tale kind of number. So in my head, I knew what the story of the present narrative was going to be and where those flashbacks would slot in for the best effect. So for Just Shop, I did sort of sketch in where a flashback would go. What was in the flashback was another story.
Absolutely fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. I really thought like, oh, what would have happened if you started the other way around?
Mm.
Um, Now, I hope the camera had opportunity to showcase again the Steingeschef that's behind you, and Jared the bot is carving the Geschöpf like there's no tomorrow. Um, so Ruby actually made this sculpture and put it into Second Life. So that's just fantastic set design.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to the
Mhm.
next reading. Before I get all this hate mail that I talk too much and like who cares how she constructs it? We want to hear her read. Well, I want to look behind the curtain. I want to publish a big story. Oh, wait, let's do a 3-minute role play here, Gemma. Imagine I
Oh
come
no.
to you, I submit to you, like I'm a writer and I
Okay.
want to publish a book. And this is actually a story idea that I did come up with back in middle school or something. It's probably
Mhm.
been, done in any number of TV shows in the 60s, so I'm not claiming that this is brilliant. But can you play a kind of a harsh, old school publisher?
Oh
And so
no.
I come to you with this brief idea, and you have to knock it down.
Okay.
Okay? Hello, Mrs. Anderson. Um,
Hello.
yeah, well, I have a great story idea. I was just wondering if you were interested in publishing it.
No, onto the slush pile with you.
Oh, that was easy. End of role play.
You said
Uh,
3 minutes, but I played it hard.
can I at least just tell you like, just like the gist of it?
You can put it in the cover letter and my assistant will read it to me later.
Okay, but I'm a really obnoxious and I'm an only child and I grew up in Germany and my mother let me do everything. So here it goes. So there's this kid and he's on Earth and then he lives his entire life and he's 80 years old and then he dies of a natural death and then it turns out he was actually an alien and his father is this alien super boss in another universe and he gave this guy, his son, as a birthday present, basically an entire life cycle on the planet Earth. So the planet Earth is actually just sort of his little plaything. And this entire life cycle of, from birth to 80 years of age, um, is actually just like 2 hours in this alien world. So that's my story. What do you think?
I actually want to read it.
Oh, you gotta be harsh.
No, you changed my mind. I'm nice now. I'm nice.
That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna sit here and say, change my mind. My story sucks.
I've had my morning coffee now. I'm in a good mood. No,
So
that
it's
sounds good though. Was that something you really made up when you
no,
were
it sounds
younger?
kind of interesting, right?
Yeah, it does sound quite interesting.
But
I thought you were gonna go for a Harry August way where he gets to 80 and then he goes back and relives his life.
oh, I don't know that.
Oh, fantastic book. The first 15 Lives of Harry August by Claire North. It's one of my favorite novels.
Wait a minute. That's somebody recommended that to me.
Yes, it's
The
fantastic.
15 Lies of, can somebody look this up, please? And put the link here. The 15 Lives of August.
First 15 Lives of Harry August.
Okay, somebody please find that link and put it in here. Um, Actually, as I'm telling you this pitch, I realized that there was a Star Trek Next Generation episode, a little bit like where Captain Picard was in a coma and then he lived lived an entire life as somebody else on a planet, and he kind of resorted himself to just living through this life, and then he woke up from the coma, and the coma was maybe just a day or something like that.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a really like good sci-fi trope, I think, isn't it? Where like you're either did Black Mirror do something like that, where you're in like a I don't know, virtual reality and you're there for a long, long time. And when
yeah,
you come out of it, you've lived a whole life and you've actually only been in there 5 minutes. Like that's a really, really good trope. I love that.
actually, since we're on the ball, anyways, thank you for now maybe I'll just quit my day job and become a writer. But Shyla is putting the link here, the first 15 lives of Harry August. Thank you, Shyla. A wonderful tip here. Um, Real quick before we go to the next reading, because it occurs to me, are you concerned or do you speak among your colleagues about, is there a concern out there that when you, because somebody here in the chat said, well, you gave Gemma a great new story idea, or Ava said that. Now, if you pitch this, if you send it out, are you at all concerned that somebody steals it, or just, the publisher goes like, hey, that's cool. I'm gonna just feed this idea to a friend of mine and then publish these guys. I mean, in music, this stuff happens all the time.
Hmm. I think it's not too much of a concern because with music, um, there are like once you put a beat or a rhythm or a melody down, you can't really deviate too much from that without it being something new. But with regards to a pitch, it's really only a pitch, and that a concept doesn't make a book,
Hmm.
because you can have loads and loads of stories and books that deal with the same subject matter, but it's how they're written, the characters, particularly if they're interesting, that will, kind of make the book good, if that makes
It's
sense.
really yeah, no, it totally makes sense. So the
Mm,
execution is part of it. You got to really execute the prose, the style, is it just takes enormous amount of work and talent to flesh out an idea. An idea is
yeah.
literally just an idea.
Yeah, there's a I'm part of a writing group, and one really fun thing that we do is we each give each other, well, a group of us will get the same prompt, and that prompt will either be a picture or it'll be a title or a concept, and we'll all go away and we'll try and write a short story based on that prompt. And
Mm,
considering that, 10 writers are given the exact same starting point,
mhm.
the divergence of stories is incredible. So no, I'm not too worried about putting kind of story ideas out there, because even if someone were to pick it up and write something about it, it wouldn't exactly be what I had in mind and what I would be able to
Well, and there's always a lawsuit you can file. Actually, I don't want to make light of it, because there is a woman, I haven't researched this, but there's a woman that's suing the Matrix production team. And for decades she is, when did the Matrix come out? 99. But for at least 10 years, this is a an effort where she says she actually had this idea, and there is some proof that she was in a meeting with some executives of the studio, whatever the studio was that produced it, and so there is a slight
do.
possibility that this kernel of an idea was funneled to the filmmakers, or to the production team. Of course, the Matrix, broadly speaking, is also an idea that's been around for a very long time.
Hmm.
Virtual reality, and also the sort of the oppression through an alien force. Anyway, I don't want to get off a tangent. Let's
Yeah.
read, Gemma.
Okay.
We're going to read Lay of the Lilyfinger, which is another wonderful story. As a musician, it really touched me, because it shows also music as an art form that brings people together. There's a lot of, it's a dense world building, but it's very open to interpretation. There's ethnic conflict. There's a colonizing a force here. There's trauma. It's all just sort of hinted at in a very, very sparse way, and really awesome story. Anything else you want to set up with this story where you're reading?
Yeah, so I'm going to read. Basically, the idea of the story is there is a bard, Sarbanishak, and her young apprentice Pom, who have been hired to perform a musical piece, as part of a young woman's coming of age ceremony. So I'm going to read a short bit where Pom is going to explore the house, and he is going to meet one of the household.
Very important. Sorry to jump in here.
Mm.
We also have to say that Pom is the protege. He's a very talented musician,
Mhm.
and he's the apprentice, the protege, and he is from a ethnic group that was persecuted,
Mhm.
killed, put in camps,
Mhm.
um, and and he was born in this camp through rape. His mother was raped, was kind of hinted at. So it's important that there is a conflict between the the where his origin,
Mhm.
uh, or his father's origin, part of this oppressing force. They
Yep.
are hated by these guys that they're um, the musician that hired these musicians.
Yes. Yeah. He is. He's coming into an area where he's being referred to by slurs, and the people there don't really have a very high opinion of him because of who his father was. So yeah, it's some sort of dark subject matter. um,
Yeah, I think
but it's
it explains well because I think it's important for what you read to understand that the country that these traveling musicians are now to perform in, that the
Mhm.
country is the one that basically liberated themselves from these really brutal oppressors. And this guy Palm, like I said, is the his father is in the military of the oppressing force. So no matter what he has done or not done, he's just seen by these people as the enemy. But he's just a child.
Yeah, yeah, he's well, it's secondary world fantasy, so I don't like to put an age on any of them because they shouldn't age like we do. But
Oh, right, right, right.
if you would imagine him to be kind of 10 or 11 years old, so he is literally a child.
Oh, could you please stand up? Sorry, this is
Yeah,
book
yeah,
club routine. Very
no problem.
regimented here. There's no freedom. Very
I'll just come back.
anti-imagination. Here we go.
Okay,
Yeah, I will move the book stand. Yeah.
so
So please, yes, go ahead.
thank you. Despite the tiring journey, Pom could not settle that night. Anxiety made him hungry, and nothing prompted more anxiety than grand houses like this one. Thankfully, the kitchen staff were used to indulging a peckish child. They were green and spoke Skinnish, yet they had none of Aurig's hauteur, and they gave him food, so Pom wasn't afraid. He accepted handfuls of spiced curd and a dozen honey sticks before dashing off again with his telltale lairish gait. He found a room in which to eat his plunder and wipe his sticky fingers on the carpet. Unfortunately, the room was not empty. A forgivable mistake to think he was alone. Bruin breathed so quietly and held herself so still that Pom would later liken her to the river dragons sunning themselves back home in Yamsame, steadfast as carved rock. She chided him in Skinnish. The sound of an unfamiliar voice made him jump to his feet, horrified. He'd known it was wrong to ruin the carpet. Being an unsupervised child, he'd done it anyway. He almost burst into tears at the thought of disappointing Sab Nishak. What to do? He didn't know how to apologize in Skinnish. Would Lairish make it worse? The agony showed on his face. She looked at his nap and long fingers and switched smoothly to Yamsamayan. Don't worry, I won't tell. The tones nagged at him like a forgotten refrain. I am sorry. Her brow crinkled. You talk like a baby. Why can't you speak your own language? He couldn't have put into words how in Yamsame, same as here, the Lairish had suppressed the native culture for generations until people simply forgot. How his mother had been born in the same labour camp she would later escape, hearing nothing but Lairish, except for bedtimes when her mother sang lullabies in her ear. How she'd done her best to pass on these fragments to her own children. That the reason he wasn't fluent in the language his larynx was made for was the same reason Bruin would have strangers performing the lay at her staining. All he could say was, no practice. You speak Lairish? She bit her lip and switched. I'm not supposed to. Then I won't tell either, he said, venturing a smile. She returned it. Though young, she looked to him as elegant as any woman. Her long green hair was slicked back, dark with oil, and her robes shimmered with prints of leaping fish. The staff in this household were clad better than almost anyone he'd met, and he'd not yet developed an eye for clothes of real quality. He took her for an aide, maybe a clerk. Without meaning to, he puffed out his chest. Are you the musician? She asked. The apprentice. My teacher is Saba Nishak, whose teacher was Saba Meshki. Have you heard of him? Should I have? He was very famous. Oh, she pouted. Are you famous? I reckon so, he said with a grin. Sometimes people pay a lot of money to hear us. We played in a Demise Plaza once while the old men sat around drinking their caffee. Oh, and there was a wedding in Lurtz where everyone stood up at the end. Saba Nishak said it was the cue to dance, but she's very modest. And we just came from Lering, which I didn't like much. We've been everywhere. To his horror, she raised her chin, wise to his bragging. Play me something. I left my lyre in my room. She shrugged. We have spares. With a gesture for Pom to follow her, she took neat, measured steps through the house, which he endeavoured to match. They came to a room that had been set aside for the purpose of storing party supplies. Crockery and extra tables took up the most space, and then there were boxes of confetti and perfumed oils and stacks of sample menus, and 10 crates of Luxor wine, and many, many musical instruments. My mother went a bit overboard. Pom gawped at her, twigging who she was at last. It's your staining. Yes, she said, pinching her robes. Who else do you think dresses like this? A maid? No, but I... Tears threatened again. He would never have boasted if he'd known she was the client. Come and see what I'll be wearing next week. She pulled him towards the large box that smelled achingly familiar. Inside lay robes of Yamsamayan velvet. She reached in to stroke the pale, stippled nap. Isn't it beautiful? Pom blinked, unsure what to say. Traditionally, such velvet was Yamsamayan skin harvested after death. When Demise looms made faux velvet possible by weaving cloth out of nap fibres, shavings of unusual length or colour became highly sought after. Pom's mother had shaved herself raw to buy food for her children. So what kind of velvet was this? Someone's skin? Or the woven nap of 100 hungry mothers? Either way, it was wrong to call it beautiful. Bruin noted his discomfort and closed the box. The lyres are over here. Her parents had rented various instruments to cover all possible options. Pom picked out a Demise lyre still bearing its loan tag, tuned it, and haltingly picked out a ballad. His own lyre boasted 6 strings, whereas this had 12, with wooden arms that smelled of beeswax and bay. Once his nimble fingers found their way around, dancing across the strings, doubling back, then leaping forward like tiny birds looking for somewhere to land, the tone grew clearer. Yes, he liked this lyre very much. Bruin followed his fingers intently. When he finished, she said, Will you show me how to play that?
And that's the lay of the Lilyfinger by our guest, Gemma Anderson. Really, really wonderful. A completely foreign world with, well, very reminiscent of our world as well, but a lot of um, well, different races that you're hinting at, and relationships, and the shining or the shinning.
The staining.
Oh, the staining. I'm
Yeah.
thinking my mind went to the shinning.
No,
The,
that sounds something very different.
the staining is the ritual where I guess a young person becomes is initiated into adulthood,
Yeah.
and that's what their music is playing.
Mhm.
Um, I want to talk about the importance of magazines. What how important are magazines? What's the relationship between a writer and magazines? This is a whole bunch of questions wrapped into one. Actually, the main question is, how do these magazines survive? How do writers survive relying on these magazines as a source of income? And I'm fascinated. I'm bringing up a slide here. This is a collage that Shala made um, of all these magazines that you were published in. Syntax and Salt magazine,
Hmm.
great website. I think they already folded.
Hmm.
The Deadlands, which I actually supported on Kickstarter, are now in I think issue number 3, and
Yep.
then all these other here, Nightmare, Interzone is well known, Strange Horizons, and a lot of them publishing only digitally. But give us the little primer on magazines. How do they
Um,
survive?
so you say, how do magazines survive and how do writers survive
Yeah.
publishing in them?
How does
And
anybody survive?
the answer is they don't, and we don't.
Mhm.
You see magazines folding all the time. I mean, I don't run a magazine. I'm not involved with any of that stuff behind the scenes. But generally, magazines, um, either they run on subscriptions, like monthly subscriptions, or they run on like an annual Kickstarter, where meeting the Kickstarter will sort of fund a year of the magazine. Um, but the readership, it we could do with a wider readership. So if
Mm.
anyone out there is not familiar with any of these magazines, maybe hasn't really read a lot of short fiction, I would highly recommend going out there and supporting some of these. A lot of them are for free, but you can support other ones and get them on ebook as well. um, I mean, they're a fantastic part of our ecosystem because a lot of people, like myself included, kind of cut their teeth on these short fiction magazines. They kind of figure out their style early on before they get
Yeah.
onto novels. And also, if you look at the awards lists and the nominees and things, a lot of the most cutting edge stuff in science fiction and fantasy is happening in short fiction because there are certain styles and techniques that you can do in a short story that you couldn't necessarily sustain for a novel. So things like second person or different formats and things like this that work really well in short story format. That would be a very, very difficult sell as a novel, for example.
So they have, if they do a Kickstarter, they have at least 1 year to go. I mean, and people are still trying. I mean, I agree with you. Whenever I read one of these magazines, that's why I supported the Deadlands. It is incredible the creativity that's on display here.
Mhm.
Um, but are they not? I mean, are they crowding them each other out? I mean, there's got to be, is this friendly
Yeah,
competition?
yeah.
Is this the last magazine standing?
No, you do see, especially if you follow the magazines on Twitter, a lot of them will retweet stories from other magazines. It's not a sort of a nasty atmosphere between them because at the end of the day, it's not a zero-sum game. If a magazine finds
Right.
readers and can sustain a readership, that's good for the health of the whole industry because it means that more readers will search out more stories.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so magazines are kind of where I got my start. So I'll always have a soft spot for them, I think.
Now, before we go to the next reading, this is actually from a magazine, fantasy and science fiction magazine. Your story, or it's a novella rather, A
Hmm.
Strange Uncertain Light. You're
Yeah.
working your way up to a novel, into an epic novel.
I know,
Uh,
you noticed.
uh, Actually, Shyla made a comment here. Let me look at. She had a question here that
Mhm.
was also on my run sheet. Can you submit to more than one magazine? How does that work? That's a good question, because
Yeah.
sometimes, if they demand exclusivity
Mhm.
from a writer's point of view, that's not a good deal.
No, I mean, there are pros and cons. It will depend on the magazine. Some magazines request exclusivity, and some of them are happy for you to submit simultaneously to other magazines. There are some magazines that will get back to you in a day. There are some magazines that will keep you waiting for months. and it
Yeah.
kind of at some point you have to kind of do a bit of submission Tetris to see what stories you can send where and how long you can wait for them. But generally, it's considered good etiquette to follow the submission guidelines, because there's nothing more frustrating for an editor to be compiling an issue of a magazine, and they're very specific, thematically they all have to kind of work together. There's nothing worse than compiling that together and bringing an issue together, and then having a message from someone saying, sorry, I've already sent this story to elsewhere and they've bought it, and now you're left with a gap.
Right.
And the
I mean, that's
editors,
understandable, but
yeah.
it's understandable. But on the other hand, for the writer, like you were
Mhm.
saying, it's hard if you have this and
Yeah.
you have to wait for someone. So it should. I mean, if there's good faith on both parts, the magazines then hopefully, and I guess they do, the good ones,
Yeah.
and that reputation probably travels pretty fast in the community anyway.
Yes.
That they're not, dragging
Yeah.
their feet while the writers are standing waiting for a response.
Yeah, I mean, it's a two-way sort of system that, the writer will respect the submission guidelines, and the magazine will kind of respect the writer's time, I guess.
Well, if everybody just behaves well, do they all have a different profile,
Yeah.
generally speaking?
Do you mean like, do the magazines all kind of have a different focus?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Focus or profile, where
Yeah.
one is more like, okay, we're experimental, we're avant-garde, and we're straight.
Hmm.
Nightmare Magazine suggests that
Yeah.
it's maybe more horror, I guess.
Yeah, you do get different magazines according to genre and style. Fantasy and science fiction has always been a really good mixture of like the traditional science fiction and the I don't know, that's more experimental. They've just been taken over by a new editor as well, so it would be very exciting to see the direction that goes in. That's always interesting when a new editor takes on and their style starts to come through on the magazine.
And when a
Um,
magazine folds, though, the Syntax and Solve magazine, where
mhm.
you publish, when that folds, do you then are you allowed to take your story and put and give it to someone else, or do you retain the rights to republish your own story in a
so
future
usually,
anthology?
yeah, so usually how it works is you sell the first publishing rights to the magazine, and that means that they will be the first place to
Ah, okay.
publish that story. And most places will then ask for an exclusivity period, say 3 months to a year. And after that point, you are then considered free to send the story elsewhere on a non-exclusive basis, depending on how the original publication is keeping it. So, for example, if it's kept online, that's kind of considered forever as long as the website is available. Um,
Mhm.
and then you can kind of take it to other places on that basis that it's available elsewhere. But would you like it as well? Because it's been a while.
I guess if the website is up, you can still link to it. If
Yeah.
you're just tuning into the Second Life Book Club, my guest is Gemma Anderson, GV Anderson. If you're just tuning into the book club now, you're also very late because we're 2 minutes to the top of the hour. I can't believe it. I mean, I used to have very good timing. It's completely out the window. Somebody in the chat was asking, is it Deadlands or Deathlands? It's Deadlands. Here is a big here. Oops. Oh, this is quite stretched. This is the Deadlands issue number 2. This is with a story by our guest. Just want to bring this up. There was another slide that I had with a quote from Gemma. Let's see here. Where is it from the Deadlands issue number 2? What was the story that you had in there? Shuck or something like that?
Yeah, it was Shuck. It's based on British folklore about a black dog that is an omen of death.
Oh, so you made it to the cover too of
I
this.
did, I did. Very
Look at
exciting.
that. So yeah, that's exciting. That's a project that I also supported. So it's my
Yeah,
first support of the magazine world.
yeah.
Um, and you can also right. So this is you have to go through them. You can't publish this on your website.
No, like if you were to post something on your website, you would be considered to be using your first publishing rights because it's then freely available,
Mm,
and that way you've burnt your opportunity to sell it as this has never been seen anywhere else kind of thing. So
mm.
it's fine to put excerpts on, they tend to say, like, for example, 10% of your story-ish is okay to put on your website for promotional purposes. But if you are thinking of publishing short stories, always give these magazines a go before you put them on your website, just because you never know, you know, that it might be a really good fit for that editor or that issue, and you might get paid.
Absolutely. Now I have to ask you again, I apologize, to stand up and
That's
walk
okay.
towards this dreaded book stand, which
I'm
now has
getting good at it now.
that. There you go. That's you know, you're learning. This is an educational program.
I have to go the
Uh,
long way around though.
this is from the story A Strange Uncertain Light. It has something in it that is called the Chime Children. Actually, Shyla prepared a slide with a quote about chime children. I have no idea what it is. Please set up the excerpt that you're going to read. What are we going
Okay.
to hear?
So, A Strange Uncertain Light is a novelette that is set in the 1930s, and it's about a young woman who has eloped with an older man, and they've gone to Yorkshire for their honeymoon, but they don't know each other very well. And they're both hiding secrets from each other. And the main character, Anne, her secret is that she hallucinates, and she doesn't
Ooh,
realize, she doesn't know if they're real or if it's in her head. She just knows that what she sees is scary and horrible and awful. It is a bit of a horror, so I apologize for the slight gore that you're about to hear.
uh-oh.
I know.
Thank you
But
for
yeah,
the warning.
so we're about in the point of the novelette where Anne is um, she has heard something and she is going to investigate it, where they are staying in this old rickety hotel in Yorkshire.
Wait, hold on. Since I haven't read this, so they're married, they don't know each other, but why did they marry then? How
So
much older is the guy?
so he is her elder by about 20 years.
Hmm.
She's very young, she's about 19 or 20, and he's pushing 40. Um, and they
Did she
haven't
marry
known
for
each
money?
No, they haven't known each other very long. She has wanted to basically get away from her family and where she was. And he is a veteran of the First World War, and he has reasons for wanting to recapture his youth as well.
Okay, good.
Cool. So, Anne's soles had left footprints in the dusty carpet, breadcrumbs leading the way she'd come. As her eyes followed them, even as her foot tensed to take a step, a draught from farther down the hall swept them away. A door at the far end hung badly, wavered, scraping against its frame. From the sliver of darkness beyond, Anne heard the rasp of saw on bone. Help! Help us! The cry sounded so close, so real, that she hesitated. It was easy to ignore the intrusions when no one else reacted to them. When she was alone, there was no way to tell if they were genuine or not. She'd left her mother lying on the kitchen floor for hours with a concussion once, unsure whether she'd imagined the shriek and smack of a head hitting the black and white tiles. If someone really was stuck and calling for help, and she turned away, just as she turned away that day, she'd never forgive herself. She approached the door, pulled it wide, the brass handle so cold it burned her palm. A belch of stale, sour air came up from the staircase beyond, chased by a drawn-out sob that might have been the wind keening through some broken window. The steps demanded she take them one at a time, hewn as rough as they were, and slick with mould. Merritt's matchbox still bulged in her cardigan pocket. She got it out and struck one, peering around a forgotten wine cellar. The racks were empty now, though the vinegary tang of wine gone bad lingered. A leak from some unseen pipe had left a film of water on the floor, so that the walls seemed to extend for infinity in the reflection, and her tiny matchlight, her own pale face, stared up at her from below. There was a door leading farther into the basement. She pushed it open and advanced into a corridor similarly flooded. The match was burning low. She shook out the flame and lit another, edging towards the first room on her right. The rasping returned, louder. "Hello?" she said meekly. That word, and then her gasp, echoed back. A boy was laid out on a table within, ashen except where the skin of his chest had been peeled aside in lapels of red, exposing white ribs. Anne reeled, dropping the match. The light guttered out, but she could still see him branded on the inside of her eyelids. Her breath wouldn't come. "It's not real," she whispered, and the whispers flew back at her. "It's not real, not real, not real. Help!" She fumbled with the matches, lost one, lit another. A lean man with his back to her, pate shining. He was standing over another body, another child, viciously pumping his arm back and forth, and the rasping of the saw was in her bones. She gulped down bile and left the room. Is there anyone here? The second room she looked in on was blessedly empty. She clasped the doorframe and sighed. The calls for help had been in her head after all. But what was that? Scratching from the next room over, and a wretched snivelling. She bit her lip and sloshed along, the water deeper here and starting to flood her shoes. The third door had slumped free of its upper hinge, its bottom cord jammed into the floor. She squeezed through the gap and held up the remaining sliver of matchstick. "Hello?" A little girl with her back to Anne, clawing at the far wall, in an attempt to reach a high-set window. She turned to look at something over Anne's shoulder, and the sight of whatever she saw there brought on a fresh, frantic attempt at the wall. The flame reached Anne's fingers, and she yelped with pain. She lit another, her last, and waded towards the girl, but she was gone now, despite having looked and sounded so solid. The wallpaper where she'd stood was sloughing away in thick, fatty strips. There on the bare stone beneath, white scratch marks in sets of 4 and 5. Anne placed her own fingers on them, in the grooves. "No," she moaned. "It's not real." "Not real, not real, real," the echoes replied. "Real, real, real."
Oh my God, A Strange Uncertain Light, read by Gemma Anderson, and the cat is
I
basically saying real, real, real. The Chime Children, it's the Chime Cats. Oh
I'm
my God.
so sorry about my cat.
This was
He's
incredible timing. This is really creepy. I mean, it's creepy as it is, and then the cat.
I'm so sorry. He just crawled across my keyboard.
Ah, that was wonderful. Actually, I think my dog was snoring in the back, but I think nobody heard that. Uh, really fabulous reading, really really creepy. I haven't read that one. I
Mhm,
have read the Hearts in the Hard Ground. And actually a question, because the Hearts in the Hard Ground is also, it's about this woman caring for her mother with
mhm,
dementia, and I mean, it's incredibly touching, but it's also a ghost story. And I
mhm.
ask this question often because I'm fascinated by it. Are you, when you go into a field that is very crowded, the field of ghost stories with a long tradition, a lot of practitioners, are you not terrified that you don't have anything to add to this, that you're just sort of regurgitating tropes?
Um, you
Or
do
if you have it,
worry,
how do you, what's
yeah.
the technique to dampen these thoughts, the
I
imposter
mean,
thoughts?
yeah, you do worry when you're writing something like Hearts on the Hard Ground, which is like it's a haunted house story with ghosts. And there's also like a Christmas Carol thing about it with the 3
Yeah,
ghosts, and you do kind of think, well, am I kind of retreading old ground? Is it boring? But what I found that I had to lean into with Hearts on the Hard Ground is the how the character relates to the ghosts and make that the story
yeah,
instead of the ghosts being the story, because the ghosts, I mean, you can do all kinds of things to make a story scary, but what will make a story which will create layers for the story is what the character feels about the ghosts, and how they might make them think about things in their life. And so that's what Hearts and High Ground is. I mean, it is a haunted house story with ghosts, but it's also not really. Because that's not the focus. The ghosts are really the vehicle for telling the story about her and what she's been through.
yep, exactly. We're over time. We're going to go a few more minutes and then we'll go into the post game, and so people can ask questions. So people have been asking sort of related questions about technique and such. So we're going to get to those. But I do have a few more. Oh yeah, here we go. I have a slide with Daphne du Maurier or Daphne de Maurier, I guess how the Americans will pronounce it. But my mother said Daphne du Maurier, and apparently, as I glean from some interviews you have given, a big one of the inspirations. Who is Daphne du Maurier? Should we still read her? Is she still relevant? I mean, my opinion is please, yes. It's absolutely awesome. Also, a movie made after a short story of her, Don't Look Back, Nicholas Rogue movie, Donald Sutherland,
Mhm.
amazing movie. Anyways, Rebecca is also known. But what about Daphne du Maurier? Who is she? Why
Um,
is she important to you?
well, when I was about 12 or 13, my family would always buy me books to read. And I remember when I was about this age, it was my birthday, and my uncle gave me a copy of Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. And it was one of those things where I hadn't read anything quite like it before. It was, written in the 30s, it's quite grown up. And that was kind of my first introduction to something other than, the children's fantasy that I'd been reading up until that point.
Mm,
So I think in terms of style and theme, she's had a massive impact on me because she is primarily a Gothic writer, particularly Rebecca and also My Cousin Rachel, which is another favorite of mine.
mm,
They're all these very typical Gothic big houses in the middle of nowhere, people going mad in them, dark secrets, sexuality. And I don't know, you just get sometimes you read a writer and something just clicks for you, and something clicked for me with Daphne du Maurier's writing.
mm, mm.
I just find her completely readable and still relevant. I mean, her
Is she
books are
still
still.
readable though, Gemma?
Mm.
Isn't she like all antiquated? I mean, come on.
No, I mean, you can read some of the oldest books out there,
I'm
and you'll
joking
be.
around. I find that actually
Yeah.
an abysmal charge of any grown-up. Sorry, I'm getting off a tangent here. At the same time, I find it sometimes difficult what is assigned to in high school.
Hmm.
Some quite antiquated. It depends on the teacher. Some of the
Yeah.
stuff that is assigned in German high school, I enjoy a lot. From the romantic period or naturalism and stuff like that. It's important, but
Mm.
for a ninth grader, the style
Hmm.
is unreadable unless you really open the themes, which are completely relevant
Mm.
to these young folks. Anyways,
Yeah, no, I mean, a lot of the stuff that I was given to read in school, I didn't click with it because you don't
yeah,
choose it, you're given it.
yeah,
So, but no, I do think she's definitely readable still. I mean, her work is still being adapted now. There was just a Rebecca adaptation last year. My Cousin Rachel with Rachel Weisz was out very recently as well. Um, and yeah, I just think, she's kind of one of those old treasures that it's good to remember what she was able to give to the Gothic genre.
awesome. And again, I'm joking around here because she's really not that old. I enjoy Honor de Balzac. I enjoy stuff from the 16th century for that matter. And I encourage everyone here in the room to pick up stuff that was published before they
Hmm.
before they were born or their grandparents. Okay, I just realized Catherine Duckett is a centaur. The well-known author Catherine Duckett is here in the audience in her centaur form, and we have not prepared a special centaur um, pillow, which is really an oversight by me as I was supervising the staff. Tsai Cheng says, didn't Du Maurier live in some village in Cornwall that was an old pirate's nest? We will find out. Catherine says, I have a comfy cushion. Okay, the cushion is comfy. She's happy. Awesome. Uh, we're going to wrap up and go a little bit in the post game. Gemma, this was an absolute delight. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for
I
having me.
hope you had a good time. I'm going to go through our slides and then we'll get to some questions uh, from the in-world audience, also about technique and such. Second Life Book Club every Wednesday, 12 o'clock, Second Life time. SL Book Club at Draxtor.com. Tomorrow is a special show. I'll get to that. Tomorrow is a 9 o'clock special show. Normally, we don't have two shows uh, per week. Otherwise, I would go crazy. Some say I've already lost it, but that's besides the point. The show is produced by Isabel Sharen Shaila, the Super Gecko, and myself. The location manager master build is Ruby Geek. Avatars are made by Ruby Geek, research by Shaila. Special thanks, Marianne McCann, Theanine, Arden Schwartzman, AJ McDowell, Brett and Patch from Linden Lab, and all the moles over at Linden Lab. We used to have security. I don't know, they don't they fired those security people, but we don't have any griefers either because I guess the griefers think like these book club people are so lame, we're not gonna grief them. We have a lot of sponsors, and you can walk around the island and check out the sponsors. I just leave up the slide here. This castle was built by Solus, and we're adding a third island that will have a display area for all the sponsors. And the island is actually, I believe, already online, but it's not connected to this island. So this is pretty awesome. Big thanks to Linden Lab. Now, very important, there's a tip jar. If you have some Linden dollars, Linden shekels sloshing around in your virtual pockets, please put it into the tip jar. God bless. And yeah, slbookclub at Draxtor.com. Jared the bot that he's carving here, you can send him a message if you have recommendations for authors. And yeah, we have a calendar, we have a Discord, we have a Flickr, we have all sorts of things. So you can check those out. And in closing, very important, tomorrow is a special show. Professor Kristen Godsey, she teaches at University of Pennsylvania. She is a very well-known anthropologist, and she wrote a whole bunch of books. She's a specialist on Eastern Europe, and she wrote a book, Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism. I encourage every woman to come, also every man. It's a fantastic book, and it's obviously a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek title because the book really goes fairly deep beyond the sex part into economic dependency and how Eastern European states were able to decouple private lives from private relationships and intimate relationships from the economic factor. It's a fascinating read. That's tomorrow, very special Thursday at 9 a.m. right here on the Second Life Book Club.